Hello, everyone. Welcome to Season Gen Z, where we'll be covering our past and maybe what our future looks like. And today we have Todd Myers, a consultant, administrator, director of the Institute for Social, Political, and Economics Research, which I read some of his papers and they were very, very interesting. But the reason I reached out to him was because he's a professor at SDSU teaching economic of the history of the United States of America. So, welcome to Hugging My Chaos. How are you?
I'm pretty good. How have you been, my friend?
I've been pretty good. We had deep conversations before starting this, so that was
Yeah,
interesting.
it really was. It was kind of nice to get the ball rolling and things like this.
First question.
hmm
What is the American dream? How would you define the American dream?
Wow, that's an interesting one. I would say, coming from Gen X, I didn't even really think too much about an American dream.
Mm.
Um, in some ways, I guess a perfectly standardized way of kind of living, uh, an ideal way of living, didn't really pop into my head. But maybe it was in the back of my head. Maybe it was like the idea that I would be able to make more money than my father, and maybe I'd be able to have a house and things like this. Maybe, but I didn't really think about these things for a while. But you go, are you just one of those unique people that's not really in tune with what everybody the attitude of a generation is? And I'm not sure. I guess like I didn't even know like I was gonna have kids, and now I have three kids now. So wasn't focused on that. But if it was the American dream, it would be that you would maybe get married. You'd be able to have a nice house. You'd have three kids, and then those kids would all somehow do better than you. That's kind would be kind of the simple idea of the American dream, right? But when did that start? And where would you get that from? And wow, I'm like going, the people who first came to the country to settle the country in the colonial periods, they were trying to, I guess, maybe have a little bit more food, or they were and land. They really wanted land, I think, and they risked coming here, and they had a horrible mortality rate. They were like dying left and right and things like this when they first came here. It was very hard to start a colony in this new world. Um, and then all of a sudden, after they're here for a while, it seems like they have higher standards of living than people living in Europe. And this happens around the time of the American Revolution. So we start to have a little bit better standard of living, and I guess transportation gets to be a little bit more efficient, and the perils of crossing the ocean are reduced. And so then people start to come here, I guess, for land. And so land seems to be the American dream, because that land seems to give you a certain amount of autonomy and so on and so forth. And so I guess the American dream, as it morphs into existence in the current time period, or what comes from that idea of having some self-sustaining freedom, because you yourself would have something like property that would enable you, as an individual, to take care of yourself, to have a say in the world around you because you were somehow self-sufficient. And
Do you think anyone could achieve that dream? Any citizen back then in the United States?
oh wow, I think, um, the time period leading up to the revolution, had some people who were starting to get crowded along the seaboard. And some of the people who eventually went for the revolution were people who were angry at the British for trying to manage the lands, where they would allow the indigenous people, the Native Americans, to maybe control the lands, and get the fur trade and things like this, while prohibiting the movement of, the Scotch Irish and so on, the English, into the hinterlands. And I think, for example, George Washington was a big real estate landholder in the territory called Virginia that included states like Ohio and things like this. And I guess they were buying up land because they could then sell it to people. But the people on average, just the like I think something like 3/4 of our population had come over, like 750,000 people or so, were indentured servants, which
Mm.
is, and then they all of a sudden started to get more and more, I guess, people here, and then the seaboard gets crowded, and then they start to go, well, we might start to become landless people again in
Mm.
this seaboard economy where we have to be workers and laborers for other people, and they wanted to escape that. And the people like Washington were exploring land, buying up land, and the British were saying maybe you can't go there. And so that got a lot of the
Mm.
people riled up because they were seeking this freedom that would come with this land to escape, I guess, social pressures. And that's interesting. And so was this available to everybody? I think you're always fighting for your freedom and your liberty, built upon your
Mm.
capacity to manage land. So do
Mhm.
you have the capacity to manage enough land to support yourself and your family?
Mm.
And so it's always a struggle.
Mhm.
And when you're in an economy, you are negotiating with others because other
Mhm.
people's needs matter. And if other people hold the land, you basically have to negotiate
Mm.
for to be able to rent a space so that you might live. And
Mm.
I guess the unique thing about the United States is the fact that it was a colonial nation,
Mhm.
and the indigenous people in the early times there was obviously fighting, but there's also diseases that were spreading that were emptying out a lot of this land. And so somehow between the fighting of refugee people, so for example, I call them the colonists, but they're also refugee people. They're leaving places like Ireland and things like this because there are
Mm.
bloody civil
Mhm.
wars. Like so, around the time that people start to talk about the introduction of slavery into the United States or in North America, I guess would be better. Um, you had in 1619 a couple like a 3 or so decades later, you're going to have these Irish people in this war, civil war.
Mhm.
They're going to kill a third of their population off.
Mm.
And I guess the Scottish people were sent over to colonize Northern Ireland, but then they weren't always completely welcome there.
Mhm.
And then eventually many of them come as indentured servants here as well. So, but they're mean people because
Mm.
they have
Mhm.
had to fight. And so when they go on the frontier, they're willing to fight for to make their claims on land as well. And so that kind of spirit becomes what we're about. So there's a struggle for that American dream, so to speak.
Mm.
And it's not
Mhm.
clearly a dream because
Mhm.
it's a struggle.
Mm.
People have to
Mhm.
fight. You have to toil. You have to,
Mhm.
if anybody's ever done agricultural work, I've done it in my life. Those 12, 14-hour days are exhausting.
Mm. Mhm.
You,
Yeah.
it's and so is that a dream? And
Mm. But this is based on what I, maybe it's wrong, maybe it's right,
mhm.
but didn't, like, before, you just one member of the family just needed to work and to sustain and buy a house and, like, sustain the whole family?
Oh wow, no, that's
Was that
interesting.
true?
When I was talking about the colonial period, we're just
Uh-huh.
trying to set one sort of American dream out
Oh,
there.
okay, because
It was a
there's
different time
difference.
period, right?
Oh, okay.
That's a horrible struggle. Now, at the end of World War II,
Mhm.
we have the emergence of a consumer society. We have the
Mm.
emergence of the GI Bill, giving people access to education who previously
Mm.
were
Mhm.
uneducated. We have an economy that doesn't fall back into a recession like people feared it would.
Mm.
And so because the United States, again,
Mm.
the United States, it sits in the world, and the rest of the world, Germany, Britain, France, so on, much of their productive capabilities were devastated by the war.
Mm.
Russia,
Mhm.
Soviet Union. So these places were absolutely wiped because of this
Mhm.
horrible world-encompassing struggle. So the United States, since it was on this kind of continental island nation, I guess our continent's like an island separated from Eurasia and things like this, and we had dominance in that hemisphere. we're relatively untouched, and our manufacturing capacity is going to become the manufacturing capacity for the rest of the world. Now, we figured it was going to be best if we helped places like Germany and Japan to recover. So we became a source of goods and services to these recovering economies. We also became the source of financing for these recovering economies. And at that point, for the average American citizen, the factories are going boom, 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 making lots of exports to everybody. So we have a more educated population. We have a consumer economy emerging. We are employed because we're providing the world with manufactured goods and things like this. And at that point, things start to look relatively good for Americans, that they might be able to have families and work and so on and so forth.
And the four houses and all of that.
Because we're in the dominant position in a world that was devastated by war.
So we didn't have like a lot of competition. It was just us shining, right?
It was our ability to in a way that we were not crushed or anything like this. And so there were opportunities emerging for people as our economy grew and things along these lines. Like the wars themselves opened up doors for many minority groups who were previously kind of put at a very disadvantaged position in the economy. And so there were opportunities in factories in the north for African Americans who migrate up there. I think around this time period, we're also going to be introducing various programs to bring people from Mexico in for agricultural work and things along these lines. So we're a land of opportunity for even the people who were marginalized. And then eventually we start to move into kind of a civil rights era, where we start to talk about equality and things along these lines. But just as we do that, other countries are becoming wealthier, more powerful, and can compete with us.
Oh, so that was the struggle. The American dream was because we had the advantage over other countries, right? That's what it was
in
possible.
some ways, yeah, you'd have to say that, and it's also, and it couldn't possibly last forever, because everybody else would have to be devastated forever. But our material well-being continued to progress. So we made technological innovations. The quality of our wow. One of the things I like to think about is when I grew up, the average square footage of a house in 1965 was something like 900 square feet. Something like 900 square feet. We had one toilet in that house of 900 square feet. Now we had four: my sister and myself, my mother, my father. So we were relatively small. I had stepsister, stepbrother, and so we're in this house functioning like that. But now today, and I might be too happy with myself and my own situation, but we have like 5 toilets and 5 people. Well, let's see. I've got to be careful. Some might not count myself or so. I've got 3 sons, a wife, and myself, and so we've got 5 people in that house. But we have 5 toilets. The average square footage of a house now is something like 2,000 plus square feet. So in some ways, our standards of living have risen substantially, just at least for me. And so I've in some ways had to live the American dream in that sense.
But hasn't like a lot of people struggle getting a house, struggle like right now, struggle getting just what I've noticed and what I've done, the research that I've done is that now it's harder to like own a house, especially if just one person works. It's hard to just pay for everything, and because of inflation.
Yeah, no. I think the millennials, that I think they're 1980 to 1997 or so. I think they started to realize that they needed 2 people to work to be able to try to make ends meet. And I think they also started to realize that, I think maybe Gen X, my generation, started to realize you needed an advanced degree to get significant economic advantages, because that professionalism, high-skilled jobs get paid a considerable premium over low-skilled jobs. And so in some ways, this is looked at as, in many ways, associated with women's liberation. but is it women's liberation when they ultimately have to go into the workforce to be able to afford um, a house or something along these lines? And I think the changes in price levels have been somewhat significant. So I think my son, uh, I was doing some calculations about what he might be earning versus what I might be earning when I started out at his age, and I think they were very similar. But I then looked at the value prices of houses, and I think the price of a house seemed to be about 100% more than what it was, or maybe 40% more, maybe 100% more, depending on the median house prices. I was looking at like a median house price in San Diego is like something like $950,000 now. The median house price in 1988 or something like that was probably about 150 some thousand dollars,
Wow.
or maybe, and so price levels back then. This was important for me to use as a kind of a rough calculator. Price levels back then, let's say they were 100. Price levels today on the Consumer Price Index in 1984, let's use that one because I know that's about 100 from where I use the base year. And today it's like about 300. So
So
it's
more
like
expensive, right?
prices are like 3 times more expensive now. And so I did the calculations on my old salary as a salesman by that, and they were roughly equivalent to what my son's salary is. But then I did that with the housing prices, and the housing price was roughly 100% more.
Oh, okay. So basically, we are earning the same thing, but we can't afford the same things because, let's say, houses are more expensive now, right?
They're more expensive
Oh,
in a
okay.
sense, and you also have to acknowledge the house is something more too. So if the average house was like these 900 square feet house with one toilet or so, but the new houses are like
All more
2,000,
advanced.
5,000 square, 3,000 square feet, 2,000 square feet, 3, 4, 5 bathrooms and things like that. That's a different product. So it's a better product.
That's why it's more expensive.
So in some ways we're expecting better products. And so if we want much more, we probably have to pay much more for it, but it makes it more difficult to actually get into the market. And because I'm like going, let's say you have to get a 10% down payment, you have to get $100,000. Is it easy to save $100,000? That's really hard to do. You have to be very disciplined. You have to be very denying of like a lot of consumption. You have to say, well, you have to go, well, I'm not going to go out to eat to restaurants that much, and I'm going to live with my parents.
Just to afford a house, right?
Yeah, I'm going to live with my parents for how long? And then maybe I won't move into the median house. So I have to move into a house that's crappier than the median. So then we feel relatively deprived because we're going, why am I moving into a really crappy neighborhood or something like this that I think's dangerous or it's not good for the kids? But again, our perspectives can sometimes distort reality. So for example, I think my neighborhood where I grew up in Canton, Ohio, I think Canton, Ohio is one of the small cities in America that was ranked as the most dangerous small city in America, at least in 2008. And it was a bit rough around the edges when I was there, but it's probably gotten a little rougher. And I think at some point I was like comparing it to Barrio Logan because how people might say Barrio Logan or something like that. And I think the crime statistics were worse in Canton. So when my wife was talking, when we looked about buying houses, you have to debate with your spouse, and usually the spouse wins. And it focuses on things like the quality of schools. And I'm going, almost any school you'd pick in this area would be multiples better than the school I went to in terms of like safety and things like this. And I'm going, wow, that's true. But because it's our relative situation and things, how we view things, we think things that are not perfect or the best are somehow unacceptable. And so then we put additional financial stress on ourselves to try to achieve what is desirable. And then when we can't get what is desirable, we feel that the life isn't fair. And is that correct, or is that appropriate?
Hmm. Yeah, well, it depends, right? Like, I feel like, I don't know. So, sometimes, are you asking me? Or?
Yeah, no, yeah, that would be interesting to figure out, right?
I feel like, I don't know. Like, I have this ideology that we're young, and if you already, like, if you know what you want, and you have to acknowledge how much work you have to put in, and how much sacrifice or investment you have to, like, put in order to get to a certain place. And I feel like that's also fair if you're willing to put in the work to get somewhere. But a lot of people, my perspective is, they want an ideal, like, let's say, house, but they're not willing to put in the work. So of course when they don't get it, they suffer because they want this. But if you look at your worth ethic and the opportunities that you have, then you're okay with that, then I feel like you should just put things in perspective and know that you are in the best place compared to other places. You know
But
what I
but 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 it's stressful to all of a sudden say I'm going to embody a work ethic and
mean?
become super productive, because how much more productive can we become? And our productivity has continued to climb over time. We've got new technologies coming out there, and so like you mentioned, you read a few of my articles and things like this. And one of the things I think, I go, well, at most, if I was actually going to be really dedicated to writing, I'd only want to have an idea to write about once a week. That would be the most. So the most I would ever write would be 52 articles in a year. But then you get people looking at the chat GPT and artificial intelligence sorts of tools, and they're starting to say, well, we could make our writers 20 times more productive. And I'm going, I guess you could, but that would be insane. At what point do we kind of overwhelm people with the amount of information and things like that, at least from the information sector economy, where we're no longer able to be human? I want to be a human being, which means I'm going to be distracted, I'm going to be amused, I'm going to be tired, I'm going to be demoralized at times, I'm not going to want to be focused constantly on being the most productive human being. But then if we put ourselves in that position where we say we have to be the most productive human being, what would be the outcomes in terms of things like, for example, mental health? You might become completely demoralized because you haven't been able to master all of the tools, which I guess that would be called depression. And you might become hyper vigilant because you'll be always concerned about what might be on the horizon, and that would be called anxiety. And both of those kind of states of being are undesirable states of being.
Okay.
And it could be produced just simply by trying to adhere to certain standards or measures of success that might be part of this thing that we call the American dream, but it's becoming ridiculously expansive at some point. Because it's not like the American dream has died in a sense, because I go, people had a 900 square foot house on average. Now the average square footage is 2,000 some square feet or something like that. So we're doing quite well, but our expectations
Has increased.
are ridiculous if you think about it. We have huge expectations about how the world's going to function. When I teach my various classes, like I teach political thought. One of my happiest moments was after about 14 weeks into the semester. A young woman in the class who was always wondering about what would be best or something like this, and very unhappy with all the compromises in the world that are there. She eventually said, I guess it's something we're just going to have to deal with. And I thought, I like, if there wasn't sexual harassment and all this sort of stuff, I would have run and hugged her and say, yes, this is it. This is the lesson I wanted you to get, that these are things that we have to wrestle with. And we always constantly have to figure out how we wrestle with these things and deal with trade-offs and all this sort of stuff. And usually the people who think they've got the perfect or right answer for everyone, they create nightmares. If their dreams become imposed on everyone in the society as the standard that everybody has to live by, they make life incredibly awkward, difficult, unobtainable, full of disappointment, and so on and so forth. More so than it would. It's like I'm not promising you won't have disappointment, but if you eventually, if you embrace a really unrealistic vision of reality, you're going to double or triple or quadruple that scoop of disappointment you're going to get.
Mm. Okay, I'm trying to understand your perspective. So you're saying that you should either conform in a way, or like, or go for it, but know that it's gonna take like a lot of risk. It's gonna be a lot of risk. Like, right?
It's your kind of choice, and there
Mm-hmm.
are different costs out there that you have to say, am I willing to pay this cost to achieve this
This and
benefit? And it's going to be something that's going to require your judgment.
mm,
But there are things that you might exclude from your horizons when you're thinking about how to live a good life that
mm,
are important to living a good life. So, for
mm,
example, some people, young women, for example, they're supposed to do everything, right? You're supposed to work, you're supposed to have a family, you're supposed to do everything. Well, if you focus on your career a lot and become CEO of this corporation or something along these lines, it might mean that you're postponing having children.
mm,
And if you postpone it too long, you can't have the children sometimes. And
mm,
that's like one of those hard rules that people don't, but why can't I?
mm,
And then they start to do things like artificial in vitro
oh
fertilization
yeah.
and things like this. But maybe this is more complicated for the child's outcome as well. So you might
Mm,
think you're going to have it all, but because of the later stage or so, you do these things, or the more complicated sort of things that you put into play, you create some difficulties that you weren't aware that you were creating.
mm,
And then you might become frustrated. Uh, but but you would have been frustrated. Let's say you decide to have 3 children, and then you have really crappy career options,
mm.
or 4 children.
So in a way, you pick what's gonna frustrate you, right?
Yeah, that will frustrate you the
The
least,
least.
right? You try to make the choice, and you're not always aware of things because you have to think about and gather information about what's valuable to you. And like, for example, I don't even know exactly the nature of trade-offs facing women. I just don't know them. And I guess individual women might have some insight into these things better than me, but they also don't know everything as well, because they can just as I can be deluded as an old white man thinking about how other people live their lives, other people from their perspectives can be deluded because they don't understand certain things as well.
Mm,
And I go, oh, and and then you have to go, how do I deal with that?
mm,
And so when we talk about it in terms of our, like, an ideal lifestyle, I don't know if I've ever thought about having an ideal lifestyle, but
mm,
in general, I've been more or less happy by not thinking about whether I'm going to be happy and just working my 2 or 3 jobs,
mm,
negotiating, or allowing my wife to basically manage the house. I don't try to
mm,
do that. She's the boss there, and things like that. And I can't say everything's easy.
mm,
I
mm,
can't say that I never had my hands go up in despair about how I'm thinking, wow, I can't believe I'm doing 3 jobs or
mm,
something like this. And I go, I don't, particularly when I was in my 40s, 30s, because that's when I really had to
mm.
work hard to do, and I had the energy, I guess, to do it.
Huh.
But these things are all very personal sorts of.
To, cause for me, I'm of the idea. I'm young right now, so like the ambition is very high. But I'm of the idea that I grew up in Mexico, so I know that there's a lot of opportunities here. You know,
Mhm.
so that like fuels me, that drives me, and every time like I'm very, I will call myself someone who's very motivated, who's very like
Mhm.
focused, and who wants to achieve what doesn't in a way doesn't want to conform with like the lifestyle
Mhm.
that my parents have, you know. I do want to like achieve different things because I know like where I come from, and I know what it took, like it took me to get here. Well, like my parents, you know, like how all the things that we had to struggle just to get here. And I just know that if you put in the work, if you just put in the dedication, although it's gonna be like you have to make sacrifices, you know, you're going to have to make sacrifices, you can get somewhere like somewhere different, you know. But I don't know. I I don't I don't see myself conforming. You know, I know that it's gonna be good for your like in if you think about it, it's gonna be good if you depending on the level of standards that you have, like the things that you
But by
value.
conforming, what do you mean? Do you mean like trying to live some sort of ideal lifestyle, or what do you mean?
Oh, by conforming, didn't like like being okay with living a like a lesser expected. You know, like I want to
So settling is what
settling.
you
Yeah,
don't
yeah,
want to settle.
yeah,
That's what you're saying,
yeah.
okay?
That's
Which that's perfectly
mhm,
fair. Many people will say they don't want to settle, and that will create a lot of ambition,
mhm,
and you'll have to compete with all the other people who don't want to settle,
mhm,
and then the question will be whose energies eventually triumph, because which is a struggle of
mhm,
sorts, right? And then what kind of tools do you use to struggle? Do you use some sort of technological tools? Like for example, I see a lot of people getting computer science degrees right now. And
mhm,
I guess they're struggling with, am I going to be the one who masters the algorithms or something along these lines
mhm,
that can do a lot of work? Because algorithms can do a lot of work. They can do, they become a super multiplier. And so that's why people in these industries like working on artificial generative intelligence can have the potential to make huge profits because that industry can basically is very scalable. It can do a
mm,
lot of stuff at some point once it gets established.
yeah, because the use of technology, right? Which is
Yeah.
something that I wanted to talk to you about. How do you think AI will replace our jobs, or do you think it's going to replace or enhance them?
Yeah, people don't really know what's going to happen in this. That like I was just reading something from the president of the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco, and she's giving talks on AI, and I guess she's in Silicon Valley, so she's at the heart of much of this innovation, right? And she says nobody knows exactly how this is going to impact our lives,
Mm-hmm.
and I think she's right. If I look at economic history, I have kind of two kind of points I can reference as possibilities. One of the points is that artificial intelligence creates a more robotic economy, higher minimum wages, for example, make it more attractive to replace workers with machines. And so then we start to have a high unemployment rate, and but our economy continues to be productive overall. And then, so how do you make that society work,
Mm-hmm.
where you have a lot of people who aren't working, and you're
The
able to
economy's
actually do this or something? That would be really socially problematic. You'd have to figure out something to do. And wow, do I really want to live in a world? And I haven't lived in that world. I've
mm-hmm.
lived in a world where I've been able to work, contribute to my family, have meaning, and all this sort of stuff. And in that I get to be a provider. How would I feel like if it were just about relations? Somebody would actually give me some sort of stipend, and I would just have to navigate my relations with I don't know if I'd evolve in that environment because
Mm-hmm.
I'm a worker. I focus on things. I'm not a particularly sensitive. Like, I am kind of a sensitive human being, but I'm not particularly good at telling people what they want to hear.
Mm-hmm.
And I go, now I'm in a world where I have to deal with relations. That would be a real
Mm-hmm.
weird world. And I'd also have to have somebody willing to give me a stipend
Mm-hmm.
off of the huge productivity because somebody would control property rights in those technologies and have patents in those technologies. And then I'd be dependent upon politics
Mm-hmm.
to somehow get me access to food, shelter, and all this stuff. That would be a very weird world. It would be not completely different from what today is, but a little bit weirder than it is currently.
But wouldn't wait? Hold on. Could you come closer? Because I think the
Oh,
mic is blocking you. Yeah,
okay,
there.
there.
I think that's good.
So
But do you? Wouldn't that be like? Wouldn't you not have control of you anymore? Because I feel like
yeah, that's the thing
that's the thing
that's
that's I see.
that's the attractiveness of our at least the the idea of the American dream. It was
Mm,
the attractiveness for those pioneers who first came here that they'd have land and wouldn't be have to be
mm,
somebody else's serf,
mm,
employee, whatever. That was attractive. the American dream, where people could actually accumulate enough wealth to have their own home, take care of basics, raise their kids, and all this sort of stuff, gave them that particular dignity. But when you become dependent upon the productivity of others, you lose your dignity to a certain degree, or you lose your place in the world, and that's a bit frightening. Now, some economists tell us that's an overly glum vision of the world, perhaps. I can actually make it glummer. Instead of actually getting a portion of the production that's made, you will be excluded from it unless you can pay rents. And then what happens when people can't rent space to live on? You see how people treat homeless people now. They're not really deeply respectful to them, are they? They're afraid of them. They shun them. They think there's something wrong with them, and they don't. And though progressive people try to help and give shelters, they're not particularly good at enhancing or preserving the dignity of those people.
And that's what I'm thinking. Like, once you said that, in a way, we're gonna be dependent whether or not the government gives us something. Like, I feel like that's a very risky place to put ourselves, because
but
we
they
don't
might not
know
give us
that's gonna happen.
anything.
Exactly, they might not
give us anything, right? And see that becomes kind of the problem. So that's a scary side of technology developing. But it could also be very positive. This is kind of the other vision that we can have.
Let's switch the perspective.
Because the vision we just presented, that becomes very glum. And like, for example, I lived in Brazil, in Latin America, and what I can see is there was a really significant difference between the poor and the wealthy there. And crime rates are relatively high. I think they have very high murder rates.
Yeah.
Something like 60 per 100,000, where we're something like 5 per 100,000. So there's a lot of tensions there, and I saw a lot of poverty. I saw a lot of begging. I saw like riots when the bus fare would go up by a 25 cents or something like that, or so. So because people were desperate, they need food and all these things. And I guess in really socially stratified situations where some people have it all and other people don't have anything, that's a very unpleasant circumstance. So I guess that's kind of the vision I have about kind of a dystopian bureaucracy overall, leading to conditions like that. That's my greatest fear. But to be hopeful, usually when we introduce new technologies, that might increase the value of workers.
How so?
Because the worker becomes more productive. Because with new technologies, workers become more productive. That could increase their overall value. Now,
but I don't think all the workers are gonna become productive. I just feel like the workers that work on technology, right?
I think you're right. So the very rosy, optimistic ideal is that workers become more productive, and as they become more productive, they get paid more money. And for the other people who were kind of left on the side, who weren't part of the technological revolution, maybe what they do is they become more innovative and creative to be able to meet the needs of these now newly highly productive workers, and that's how they get access to cash and the ability to live their own lives. So that's kind of the optimistic scenario, that the market itself incentivizes people to become creative, solve their own problems, and just because we have a new technology present just means we make more stuff, and then the way people get access to that more stuff is by meeting the needs of the people who are getting paid more for being more highly productive, which I guess in the Brazilian context, it might mean that the house I lived in, they had 5 servants or so. So I didn't grow up with 5 servants here. I think my mom had a lovely woman named Mrs. Purcell, who would come and clean maybe once a month with her, and it was kind of a very egalitarian sense. Oh, she'd clean before Mrs. Purcell came to help clean and things like this, and then they would all eat lunch together and things like that, and that was kind of that situation. And whereas I guess in Brazil there was just more people as kind of house servants and things along these lines. And is that what the economy would be like? I guess if you're working for a very rich person, you might get paid a lot of money to be a butler or something along those lines.
Wait, sorry. So this is what you're saying. You either are rich or you work for the rich, right?
Yeah.
If not, you're gonna be.
Or you could have creative ways of meeting the needs of the poor who are empowered by working with the rich. Because then or there could be black markets and things like this where you move into kind of illicit behaviors that probably are serving the interest of the rich who are doing drugs or something like that aren't allowed, permitted by law, but they are somehow desired by people who have resources. So you get this kind of economy that's not hugely different than the economy we have, but it's built upon market principles and creativity and innovation, higher levels of productivity, and Lord knows we might have higher standards of living at that point in time, but we're forgetting about something. The thing we're forgetting about is how we're ultimately dealing with we're dealing with questions about the more stuff that we make, the more we heat the planet up, and how we might ultimately reduce the planet's productivity by making it too warm.
Oh shoot! So that's another problem that.
That's
may
a variable
arise.
we have to think about, right? So we can't only think of, and for example, artificial intelligence technologies, they tend to be very energy intensive. And as we tend to try to make the world more legible to artificial intelligence technologies, we have these data storage centers and things like this that need a lot of cooling and get very hot and things along these lines. And so they would be maybe factors that, if they were more widely distributed, would be disadvantageous to our overall climate. And so we've got, our puzzles are complex. So we can't, if we look at one of them, we can be optimistic and say, which I guess my optimistic picture wasn't that optimistic. It wasn't really that optimistic, was it? But it was saying that people could have some autonomy.
Like there's a way out, right?
That they would have some autonomy and choice and things along these lines. Because I think life is always hard. I think not to give pity parties to the rich or anything like that, but for example, King Charles with his recent red portrait, he's getting flack from the entire world because of this painting that was done by him. He's an old man with cancer. Life is hard, and he's probably one of the richest people on the planet. So I don't think at this point I don't think I'd change my position with King Charles III in England. So money doesn't solve all the human problems. I think sometimes we use it as a fantasy where we think we solve all of our problems, and so it's like a delusion.
But I feel like money, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like money gives you, like, in this sense, gives you control of things, control of you,
It gives you more options.
More options, yeah.
But your control's not perfect, is it? Because cancer is something you can't control, right? Maybe he'll be able to live
But
a
you
little
can
longer.
go to like a very expensive place where they can like treat you better or something.
You'll be treated better while you feel miserable. I don't know how much that additional good treatment actually changes the condition, and so I'm and this is so the fact that we're in this human condition that's very challenging with multiple parts of the puzzle moving seems to be just the truth. We're in this kind of struggle. We're trying to figure out how to make things work. Sometimes we make it better. And I think when we're doing peaceful transactions, like trading, we're specializing, we're thoughtfully incorporating technology to improve our lives and things like this. We're moving in the direction of making things better, not perfect, It'll still be a struggle and things along these lines. I tend to have like metaphysical faith. Like I tend to go, well, I hope that in the end of days, all this suffering is made well by Jesus' love and so on and so forth. But that's kind of a metaphysical faith. And in some ways, that metaphysical faith allows me to deal with the many unsatisfactory things that life gives us. Now, Gen Z is interestingly has become less religious. I think of the millennials being less religious and things along these lines. Maybe for good reasons, because there are a lot of people who abuse religion and make it a ridiculous joke and empty because and the source of their own greed, their own hates, their own biases, a whole bunch of things.
They
that
become
aren't good.
too attached, right, to that idea.
Yeah, and they ultimately they get caught on things that are not things that actually improve the quality of human life. Maybe it's because they're trying to manage their fears, their anxieties, their difficulties, and somehow they figured out how to do that in a suboptimal way. Which if you become more nationalistic, if you become more intolerant, these are probably suboptimal ways to manage your anxieties and things along these lines. You're not adding value.
But it's gonna go like I'm gonna sidetrack from economy a little bit.
It's okay.
But do you think losing religion or losing the spirituality is gonna disconnect us further from people? Because
yeah, no, it does.
that's what I
That's a
think,
risk, right? You have, because like one of the things that I have in my heart of hearts, even is I think this is what promotes in some ways a positive social ethic where people actually care about the homeless, even though they do it inadequately, even though they do it clumsily. We somehow have in the back of our minds that this person is in the image of God. They have a certain dignity that I can't simply ignore them because of social snobbery or my security concerns. Because they have a dignity and they deserve some respect. And that comes from our Christian faith, I think. At least for some people it comes from Islam. For some people it comes from Judaism. For some people, it might come from Hinduism or something along these lines. So there are all sorts of paths to it. But historically for us, it's been through our Christian faith predominantly, as we now wrestle with a lot of different faiths emerging and wanting to claim faiths. And they were always there, but our cultural narrative tended to be more Christian.
And I feel like personally, that's the importance of, because you can feel good, you can do techniques that make you feel good, but spirituality or like religion allows you to feel good for others, have empathy for others, you know? What do you think will be the effects of losing that? Because Gen Z is losing that a lot, according to research.
Well, I think it puts a break on our anxieties. I think it puts a break on our depression. I think it puts a break.
Losing religion?
No.
Oh.
Losing it, I think religion actually puts a break on many of these bad things.
Okay.
So if we lose it, we've lost something that was incredibly valuable. And we didn't think of it as being incredibly valuable at the time, but when we don't have it, we will recognize how valuable it was. It loses, it puts a break on greed, for example. So the fact that I just, like at some point, if I go, well, I've got to make another $2 billion, and I'm like going, and I'm going to build some ridiculously expensive ice castle or something somewhere with my $2 billion. Somebody else might say, people are starving to death. Why are you building a ridiculous ice castle? If I have a Christian faith, or I'm in a society with a Christian faith, everybody starts to go, maybe that's right.
Yeah.
Maybe you shouldn't build the ice. Maybe you might want to try to build affordable housing for people, and then you'll get status. We'll say you're a great person because you helped house the poor, or something like this, and which will fulfill the ego need of the individual, but it does it in a pro-social manner. And that's partially because every one of us has a certain amount of dignity, at least according to the Christian tradition. And I don't want to exclude other traditions, because that's part of the problem of faith. Because as we have multiple faiths, which we do, we're not going to get rid of all the different faiths that are out there. then the question becomes, why are there so many different ways of doing this? And because the stories literally often seem like jokes or kind of not true or whatsoever. But at the core of those beliefs, they do some really useful and good things, and they indeed might in some way be true. So in terms of how we exist in this world in our mortal state and things along these lines, um, it just might be absolutely true that the symbol experiences of faith point us towards these truths in a way that enable us to have a more satisfactory experience of our conscious existence on this earth. Uh, and I tend to believe that. So I would be concerned if people will dismiss these things as irrelevant. And I'd be concerned if they try to replace them with things that they think they're more in control of. Because some people like if somebody said, I only want to be religious because I want to make more money. Because let's say you make more money if you're part of this particular religious denomination. That might be true, but your utilitarian approach to the faith would mean that you would be losing a dimension of openness to experience that might be more valuable than the additional amount of money you make. So you proposing that you are the boss in control of everything and you're manipulating a faith for your own personal good may be a really stupid psychological spiritual move. And so you might actually lose what the tradition offers. There's also risk. So if people become fanatics or they decide to impose certain sorts of behaviors that are really intrusive, unpleasant, annoying, cause more pain than good, they can get the religion caught up in a certain sort of fanaticism that can really become a burden to human existence. And that's probably because they think somehow they understood the nature of reality so well and the mysterious nature of God so well that they've got the exact answer for each and every one of us, and they want to impose it on us. And that seems to be more like a hell than anywhere near salvation or what a true religious spirituality would be.
Oh, so you're saying that some people, in a way, use the knowledge of like religion to use it against us, I guess?
Well, they misuse it, don't
misuse
they?
it,
In a way that maybe they think is going to somehow solve their problems, their emotional, spiritual problems, but they distort it in such a way where they cause much
harms.
more pain, misery, and probably intensify their spiritual suffering, psychological suffering, more so than they would than if they approached it in another way, which is a more open way, understanding our own limitations, understanding we participate in a reality that is inherently, in many ways, tragic. You can't deny that. Life is tragic in many. You see horrible things all the time. But if we approach that tragedy with a sense of love and hope that in the end it's formative, that not in the end of what I want, but in the end of time, once I cease to be, I think you have a very valuable solace and way of orienting yourself through economic struggles, through political struggles, and so maybe that somehow makes things better, though not perfect.
I see your perspective, and I do agree with your perspective. But let me go back to the economic aspect, and we were talking about the rich and poor. Can we talk about the income inequality? Is it true that the gap between rich and poor is becoming like wider?
Well, in 2022, the gap between the rich and the poor briefly became less. But one of the things is I would expect that the gap between the rich and the poor would become wider, and it has over time. So it's not anything I'm speculating about. So wage earnings for the average kind of worker or something like that remain pretty flat. Whereas a lot of the gains in the economy in terms of economic growth have been going to the top 1%, 10%, and things along these lines. productivity gains. Workers have become more productive, but they've been getting a less share of that productivity gains in terms of their own salaries. So that's been happening. Um, the things that often reduce inequality are sometimes bad things, though. So sometimes you'll have like a stock market collapse. That will reduce inequality because the wealthy people often have a large amount of value in stocks. And if the stock market collapses, that value disappears, and therefore the gap between the rich and the poor becomes more narrow. During war, often this wars often create a more equal society as well, and things along these lines. So equality isn't necessarily good. It sometimes is a representation of some bad things. Now, my friends, like I have a friend who likes to think about this, and he likes to say, well, there are fewer people in the middle class now, but there are actually more people who are rich. And there are more people who would be poor subsequently. So that middle would be eroding. And then the question becomes not whether it's bad to have rich people or not. The question becomes, are poor people now living better lives? And like, for example, if you look at kind of the media devices people have, like almost everybody has phones right now, right? Everybody has some sort of access. Almost everybody has some sort of access to the internet and things like this. The King of France did not have as many music choices as the average McDonald's worker does today. Right? And entertainment choices are great. The King of France's carriage is not as fast as somebody's Kia or something along these lines. So if somebody has like a Kia, a little small car, kind of or Swatch car, what are the smallest, crappiest car you can imagine? That's faster than the King of France's, Louis XIV. So let's give him his carriage and things like this. So you look at those things, and you go, is that what the economy's doing? Is it creating new goods and services that ultimately enhance the quality of our life? And then they would say the question of greater inequality or lesser inequality is irrelevant. The question becomes, what are the absolute standards of living that people are experiencing? They would put that there. So that's one perspective. I'm more concerned about dignity often. And so I think like for example, I think at one point in my classes, I did an equation where I figured out that based upon my salary, Bill Gates was equivalent to 67,000 of me. And I go, as smart as Bill Gates is, I'm certain 2 or 3 or 4 of me might be able to think more efficiently than Bill Gates. I think that might be true. And I'm certain as strong as Bill Gates might be, I'm certain maybe one of me or maybe 1.5 of me might be able to defeat Bill in combat. I'm almost certain of that. And so there's a lot of equality here. And I think, why does this one man have so much influence in our society? Because of the dollar votes that he gets. And I go, there will always be some sort of inequality there that in many ways just seems simply unjust, right? Because according to my Christian ideals, I'm created in the image of God. You're created in the image of God. Wow, that's as equal as we get, right? That's Now I know that's not the case on planet Earth. I know there are people who are capitalists. They have more money, and I know that some people are just more productive, so they will produce more. So I had a friend who, when we had to build tables at work, he built 5 tables and we built 1. And he just went boom, 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 boom. I'm going, well, he's 5 times more productive than us. And if we were only building tables, I would say he should get probably 5 times more money, or at least
more than you.
More, right? But if people were saying, well, since he's 5 times more productive than you, Todd, you don't get to eat, I would go, I can kill him. And so you don't want people to think that either. So at some point, you have to figure out some sort of social negotiation. It can be done in markets because that's a social entity where people go, how much do I have to pay these people who are working for me before they don't hate me and have complete contempt for me, or I don't hate them and have complete contempt for them? And I think that's an emotional component of how we distribute resources that doesn't get talked about a lot. But I think that sense of human dignity and how people negotiate these issues out becomes very important, because I think some people like to talk about other people as if they are the gum on the bottom of their shoe. And these people are often very hardworking. They contribute a lot, but they are treated like the gum on the bottom of a person's shoe. And I don't appreciate that. And so I think my society is worse when people go, well, if you don't know artificial generative intelligence and you didn't figure out how to do that, and you are a janitor or something along these lines, something that's very important to do. Upkeep of buildings is very important. But if you're in that position, you don't deserve health care, or you don't deserve whatever. And I start to think, that doesn't seem right. That seems to, and we may overestimate what good can be done for us by the various sort of rules, regulations, wages, and all this sort of stuff that we receive. But if the social conversation is disrespectful to the people who make up the society, you move to the point where you make society worse. You make it more violent, you make it more unhappy, so you make it more unpleasant for both the wealthiest people and for the poorest people. So I would say that since wealth might very well have a tendency to centralize itself, and I can just use a simple kind of story to show how that would work. If somebody, Donald Trump, when he was doing his Apprentice show, he would say, the reward for winning this challenge is you can spend 10 minutes with me, which I thought it was kind of one of the most absurd things anybody could ever. I go, well, I don't really care. What can I do in 10 minutes? But people with really good ideas could say, here's a really good idea that's going to make lots of money, and I need capital. And then Donald Trump gets to hear those good ideas. He gets to pick maybe 100 or so good ideas from different people, where they're not going to tell me the good idea necessarily. Maybe I don't have time to even talk to them, but I'm too busy working. But when they talk to Donald Trump about their good idea, he then has the choice to pick from some good ideas. He could pick badly. If he does that, he loses his wealth. But he's getting some of the best ideas because people want to talk to somebody who has capability. So what's the probability that his wealth will grow? Unless he runs for president and causes everybody to hate him and do all sorts of things like this, right? He's likely to have his wealth continue to grow. And is that how it works? And we take money from taxes and we try to throw it out to give people educations, to give them health care, to give them better roads, to maybe give them community centers and things like this, to give them stipends when they're unemployed, to improve the quality of the environment around them. So we throw this money out, and maybe we have to do that. And then the question becomes, how much of this money are we going to throw out, and where are we going to throw it to try to make the society the best society? Because then we create more dignity for people by these people who are in relatively good social positions that benefit from a stable society, that benefit from good rules and norms and laws and all this sort of stuff. And because they've come across a scalable idea, they become often ridiculously rich.
So what I'm trying to get is that the standard of living hasn't really changed. In fact, it has improved. However, what we're losing here, if we stay like on the bottom, is dignity and unfair treatment.
Potentially, right? Depends what your society says is the norm. So there are society. I guess there could be a society that would say, there's no shame in being a janitor. There's no shame in being a farmer. There's no shame in any of these things. They all need to be done. I think during the pandemic, My son, he was working at the grocery store. People needed people to work in the grocery store, and they worked those people to very hard, and they were on the very front lines of doing things. We need groceries. We need these commodities. And previously, maybe 5, 6 years earlier, I was in let's say a health club, and I was exercising, and somebody was saying how they didn't want to have grocery workers get health care benefits. And I'm thinking, wow, those people are very useful. And I've got somebody here who feels completely confident that they can say that in a public place as if that's their legitimate position, because they don't want to actually pay maybe slightly higher prices for whatever. And I interrupted with him. I go, well, I do think they deserve health care benefits. And I don't like higher prices and things like this. But in some ways, it's recognizing that you should be if we have a system of health that's difficult to get into and extraordinarily expensive and can bankrupt you and ruin your life if you are unfortunate enough to have certain circumstances happen, maybe we should try to share that risk on a broader level and protect the people who are actually contributing to the society. And
But that doesn't happen, right? It doesn't usually
well, it's
happen.
hard to
Yeah.
do, right?
Yeah.
Because he obviously is just like, because I think the
Yeah.
way I think doesn't mean everybody else will agree with me. Many people think they don't deserve health care. Personally, since I'm a teacher, professor, and all this stuff, I go, I've got good benefits. I think I would be remiss to argue that other people don't deserve more security. I don't know if we have the resources for it completely. We spend like 1/5 of our GDP on healthcare, and so we're probably one of the more inefficient countries in terms of providing healthcare services and all that stuff. But I become like when I think about it, I go, how can I'm teaching maybe 1/3 of the population or so, being exposed to the top 1/3 of the population. How can I not advocate for the dignity of every human being when because I guess I have some moral or spiritual authority.
I see. Yeah, I think there's so many. What I'm hearing is that you want equality, right? It's important to have equality, but like if you look at the reality of the world, you see that there's
There's forces that are moving towards inequality.
and now that we
And those
added,
forces are sometimes good, like technological innovation.
but now that we talked about AI, we see that maybe in the future it's gonna be harder for
It could
us
become
to,
worse.
yeah, it could become worse, right?
Yeah, no, it's almost certain to become worse because, as I said, these various centers that AI produces to make everything legible, data becomes a commodity, manipulating the data, doing the algorithms to try to figure out what's going to happen to the data becomes costly. Who's going to be able to pay those prices? Very wealthy people.
Yeah.
What would additional information do to enable to help you to preserve your wealth or expand your wealth? And the people who didn't have that information, what kind of disadvantage would they be at?
Yeah.
They would be at a severe disadvantage. So we would have a tendency again to concentrate wealth, to have more wealth concentrated. Now there may be limits to what information can do in the economy.
What do you mean?
Well, right now we think, wouldn't it be great to just know everything, right? But at some point, what might become more valuable is somebody could do something. So people actually who are plumbers, electricians, and all this sort of stuff become very valuable because they can actually do stuff. So once you've identified whatever you think is the problem in some place, you then need people to do stuff. You need people to build stuff. You need people to act. So in a sense, even though information will be valuable, it will not eclipse the value of people who actually do things.
Like innovating?
Well, no, I'm not even innovating. Just the need to do things, to do the ordinary things of daily life or so, to fix plumbing, to wire electricity,
to solve the problems, right?
to actually make things work. And we're going to need people like this, right? So that gives us some hope that the extreme kind of elites will have to be putting money into places where people learn to do things and things like that. So that's a break. So we don't need to get like completely apocalyptic about the future, because
human being, the realities of Earth means that things matter. Some things matter more than information.
Something. Yeah, yeah.
So
But you mentioned this. I don't know. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you said that creativity is gonna be a useful skill for many of us.
yeah, no, I think that would be a great thing to be creative at. But guess what with the Chat GPT and things like this, they're painting pictures right now.
Yeah.
They're doing many things that are very creative. Maybe writing musical scores and all these things. They might not be great.
But they're improving. They're gonna improve.
But they might very well may improve and things like this. And then what happens when these tools are so creative?
Yeah.
I'm like going that we still have that material reality in which we live, we breathe, we eat, we build, we make things, and all this sort of stuff. So those things will become are going to remain important. So people may be overexcited about ChatGPT or artificial intelligence in some ways. They may overinvest in it or something along these lines, which historically that's what often happens is people get excited about a new technology.
Yeah.
The new technology holds promise to improve many conditions. They have to figure out how to use those technologies. Some people use them better or not. They get
Take advantage of it.
They are more capable at manipulating the technology. And some people are less adept at it, but money flows into all different sectors. So some people's money going into artificial intelligence will inevitably go into probably a bad company or many bad companies. Those bad companies will collapse. And then we'll have financial crises or so because people who thought they were going to be really rich will all of a sudden discover, oh, artificial intelligence is good, but it's not as good as I thought it was going to be.
There might be a clash in the economy, and then the
Right,
story.
right.
The
And
history
we also have the material conditions of the environment we have to think about as well. And presumably, according to most climate scientists, anthropogenic global warming is something we're doing. So human activities do shape the atmosphere, and the quality of the atmosphere is very important for our well-being. So we have to think about things like that as well.
So there's so many things coming into play, right? Like for the future. So like AI, the income inequality, then environmental issues. So it's gonna be interesting.
And there's one more I'll give you.
One more.
The kind of crazy politics the globe is experiencing right now. So we have all sorts of geopolitical threats. We've got war in the Ukraine. We've got war in Gaza and things along these lines. We have the potential of war in the Korean Peninsula. We have potential of war in the South China and East China Sea and things along these lines. We have populist political leaders coming up who are in many ways the embodiment of selfishness and aggression, whether it would be in a country like Brazil, where they had, I guess, Jair Bolsonaro for a while. Now I guess they've got Lula da Silva. But he's probably a left-wing populist in some ways. So these people are trying to mobilize people on the basis of their passions and emotions and desires, are becoming very important political players. In the United States, for example, we have Donald Trump versus Joe Biden, which that's probably nobody's fantasy election to a certain degree. If you had 330 million people to lead you, and you were looking for somebody to emblemise what your culture was about, would you want either one of those people to represent you? And I'm deeply concerned. But those are the choices that seem to be there at this point in time. So what will that do to our politics? I think the first time Donald Trump was elected, they were offering mental health care services to SDSU faculty or something like that. I do believe that was true. That was what happened, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know what's going to happen if he gets elected a second time, how that's going to affect the education industry, for example.
What I also think is happening or is going to happen in the future, we're going to become more like divided more. And you talked about this in your propaganda article, but we're going to become like, it's us versus them, all the time. So we're going to be divided, like, and that's gonna create a problem, right?
So some of the oddest things that I've noticed, and this is one of the oddest ones, which is young women tend to be tending more left politically. Young men, at least, seem to embrace more conservative or right-wing positions. Well, in order to have a human being, we need both a young man and a young woman to get together, and things like this, right?
Yeah.
But there's something interesting I saw even further here. So Gen Z had something like, I believe, 1/4 of its group identify as LGBTQ plus, and I'm going. That means that unless that plus is something I don't know about, that means that it's going to be difficult to reproduce more people, which this could be a good thing, this could be a bad thing. But for most societies that are trying to take care of an aging population, you need young energy. And so, like, if your generation doesn't reproduce itself, then you have to open yourself up to having more people from around the world come to the country to basically fill the slots that will be needed in the economy at that point in time. And then you deal with more cultural complexity about how people feel about one another and things like this. And it can always be managed, but it's not easy to manage these things. So that's a really big and significant thing for a Gen Z. Because depending on how you manage gender and child procreation will depend on what political future you ultimately inherit, and how stable or how supportive things will be for you, unless the robots do it all for you or something like that. And I think the Japanese have tended to try to have robots do it all for them.
What do you mean robots do it all? Like
Well, for example, as their population gets older, they're trying to
take care of
incorporate
them.
more robots into taking care of their elderly people. So you have experiments in trying to have the cheerful robot that will talk to you when you're old. I'm going, I don't know if that's going to work. Maybe the only thing that will talk to me will be a cheerful robot when I'm old.
But what I'm seeing from all of this is that, like, it's becoming like those science fiction movies where, like, basically robots, the technology is, like, in a way controlling you, and people think that technology is gonna control us. But if you look at our lives, we're controlled already by our smartphone.
We have it all the time, don't we?
Yeah, like it's controlling.
Do you
what
ever
we watch,
not look at your
you know?
smartphone?
Yeah.
What percentage of the day don't you have your smartphone?
Yeah, exactly.
I'm like, I left the house once without my smartphone. I went back to get it. One, and that's like over a decade or something like that, right?
Yeah, that's what I'm seeing. I feel like we don't want to be controlled, but we're slowly becoming controlled by the technology.
It tracks us. It knows where we're
yeah.
going.
It knows
what
what
our
we like,
desires and
yeah.
things like this. This will probably know when McDonald's needs to send me that coupon to tell me about that Big Mac. It will probably be on a very cold night when I'm going, wow, and I'm very sensitive to the French fries and salt and all that stuff. It's going to do it. And then the question becomes, is that what's good for me? And then I'm going to have to go, God, Todd, you have to stop eating the Big Macs. You're 60 years old almost. You can't eat the Big Macs. It's going to clog your heart. But then I'll have another app say, walk this number of steps.
Exactly. And we're going to be depending, like, our whole life is going to be depending on, like, technology. Because we're talking about, like, we're scared that we're not going to have that dignity of control of our lives.
But we're giving it up.
We're giving it up right now, like, literally.
And it's like, and see, on some level, like, let's see, if I go back to 1980 or something like this, 1980s, when I'm kind of a teenager like you, what did I do? God, I just hung out with people. I'd run. I'd watch TV occasionally. I'd go hang out with people occasionally and things like that. So, is my life really that different? Like, I remember sometimes, like, I'd play a board game by myself. That really sucks in terms of quality of entertainment versus what we have now with regards to video games and things like that, right? We've got very engaging stuff at this point. Are our nervous systems built for so much engagement? Because, like, I'm constantly engaged. And just a few days ago, I'm just, like, starting to go, God, this is just too much. I've got Gaza, I've got Ukraine, I've got inflation, I've got presidential politics. I've got East China Sea. I've got heat waves in the Philippines and things like. And I'm just like going, this is going to drive me nuts and things like this. If I keep processing these things, and then all of a sudden I just go, okay, time. But do you know what I do then? I go to Netflix or I go to Prime and I go, I'm going to watch something like Carnival Row, a steampunk drama detective story with fairies and satyrs and all this sort of stuff. And I'm watching this, and it's doing a pretty good job of entertaining me. Yeah. And I go, that didn't exist so easily before. So what is our illness also seems to be producing our cures.
No, I feel like it's producing our distraction from our illness, you know? Like, you're distracting yourself from reality by going into a fiction reality, you know?
But wasn't it like a fiction this is one of the things I've been thinking about, because we had some protests on campus, I think, about the pro-Palestinian protests and things like this. And I look at it and I go, okay, but isn't that a distraction from most people's lives there? And I go, how many people actually are connected to Israel-Palestine who show up to those protests and things like this? I go, that's kind of a distraction. And then in a less kind of politically charged manner, I look at it like when I was a young kid, maybe your age, I was doing Lincoln Douglas debate, and I was doing things like extemporaneous speech. And I'd give these talks about world politics and things like this. What do they have to do with a kid in Canton, Ohio? I still do this stuff. Like I went to the school newspaper. I'd write about civil war in Angola and things along these lines. What were those things but diversions from my own life? What were the most significant things for my own life? The most significant things for my own life. Am I going to find somebody to date? Am I going to get a job? Am I going to am I going to be starting on the football team? Things like this. Or what am I going to do here? My friend's an idiot and drinks too much. So things like this, right? You've got, those are the real things. Those are the things I would have the most of control over. And how much control over those things did I have? Control over those things was very limited. So whether I was going to start the football team, God, the genetics already were working against me. I wasn't going to be the one starting on the football team.
Oh, so you're saying that you didn't have control of
the things that were most immediate to me, that I have the most, theoretically I have the most control over.
But I feel like you did have more control of those things rather than like the big things.
Yeah, absolutely I did. That's the kind of key element. So I'd be out there and I'd be running sprints, and I got my sprint time down to something like 4.7 or something like that for a 40-yard dash. That was as good as it was going to get for me. I wasn't going to get like into the category where somebody's going 4.5. That was an impossible place for me to be. But I pushed myself from like maybe 5 to 4.7, which was what I could do. So I did improve myself by focusing on what I could do. It wasn't probably enough to get me that starting role on the football team, but it did make me much faster than other people of my size and capabilities and things along those lines. So I go, okay, that's not too bad. But we often flee what we have the most control over to places where we're in kind of fantasies right now.
Yeah.
And so when I was young, international relations was kind of a fantasy, really. I did eventually work with a Secretary of State, so it wasn't that far off from what would happen for me. But initially, it was kind of a fantasy. And it was a kind of a distraction.
'Cause that's how I see. That's like when I was looking at Gen Z, I started to get overwhelmed because I was like, there's this and like there's so many things. But my friend told me, you gotta be able to know that it's okay. It's important to share this. It's important to share the knowledge. But there's so much you can do, you know, and you gotta be able to just acknowledge that and accept that. Work on the things that you can do, but don't overwhelm yourself.
Yeah, so all of a sudden, what becomes important for Gen Z is figuring out techniques to manage the massive amounts of information that you're going to be exposed to.
Yeah.
And which that requires judgment. Now, since you don't, since you're younger, your judgment is limited. Like I think it takes until like 25 before your prefrontal cortex gets wired and things like this. So it's harder to have good judgment. You're going to make mistakes. The technology world means sometimes your mistakes will be captured online forever. And people are sometimes not very forgiving to a certain degree, right?
Yeah, especially in this time, in this generation, I feel like we don't forgive the past.
Yeah,
There's a lot
but
of-
you're probably going to learn to forgive the past.
Yeah.
Because at some point, there's going to be so much pain caused by how people think that this is the only way you're supposed to live, or anybody who does this it's completely wrong. There's going to be so much pain there that people are, in order just to live with one another, they're going to have to just eventually forgive one another. Or they could decide to become kind of nutty,
And more violent.
more violent and aggressive towards others. But how does that end? It never ends well. So.
Okay, so to end the episode, it was very informational. Let me give a conclusion, and let's see if you agree or not, or if you want to add more things. But basically, this is what I'm getting. Technology. I'm actually getting the negative perspective, kinda. Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Like
But
life's complicated.
of course,
right?
we don't know how the story ends because we're still writing the story. But for now, from what I can see, is that technology is playing a big role in our lives, and it's gonna continue playing a big role in our lives. It's gonna help out the people who are either managing or taking advantage of it, and it's gonna make the people who are just getting distracted by it a lot like poorer in a way. Potentially, which is gonna widen the gap. And even though we're gonna still be having better conditions than the past, the dignity that unity as a whole is gonna become more like wider, and that it's gonna impact the relationships because like you said, and I totally agree with this, I see that a lot of like there's a gender difference even in political, there's a that's gonna separate us, that's gonna separate and increase this division, which could create violence, and that could be the potential route we go.
Oh, interesting. One of the interesting things is that typically when a man pairs with a woman, his testosterone levels ironically go down,
Really?
which means that we become less of a problem.
Oh.
So if our society makes it more difficult for men to pair with women, it may very well increase problematic behavior. So that's because it's like we're not ideal. I think one of my students the other day was saying how men are scary and she's afraid of men and things like this. Then I pointed out to her, I go, but you also desire men potentially. So fear and desire are kind of the relationship that emerges there. And just like anything else, that becomes something difficult to try to manage. How do you manage it? And wow, I'm old and married for X number of years, and I'm still learning how to manage this. I guess the key element becomes there can be consequences to abandoning the way things have been done in the past, and they don't seem to all be great.
Yeah.
So some of the burdens that people think that they're getting rid of, they may be exchanging for other problems. And I go, I don't know the answer to this, right? I'm not Nostradamus or anything along these lines. So when I think about these things, I go, yeah, how do these things play out? And I go, they're always going to be complicated.
Yeah.
And there's going to be good things, there's going to be bad things. You can try to accentuate and maximize the good things and minimize the bad things, but that requires intelligence, judgment, and skill. So if our political leaders are all of a sudden smart enough to go, oh yeah, no, we have to stop telling people they're lazy and stupid and useless, and we have to make sure that everybody who contributes to the society feels embraced and so on. If we do that, we can make things better. But if the kind of the hateful fear and that people have hate and fear, because one of the responses I often have when I'm kind of overwhelmed with everything is I'm going, I just wish the people who don't agree with me disappear. they won't, unless I do something horrible, and then I don't want that to happen. And so then it comes down to, how do I live in this world, find significance in this world, and amidst the complexities of it all, trying to leave it as a better place. And I guess that's what I would advice I would give to Gen Z, which is, you're going to face lots of challenges. We don't know what they're going to be exactly yet. It could be the challenge from overwork, overstimulation, or it could be the challenge from being completely ostracized from the mainstream economy potentially. So there are lots of problems there. And so you're going, which way do I want to go?
But good luck.
Well, there will be a meaningful path forward, and a worse way. There will be many bad ways and many good ways that you can address whatever condition you find yourself in.
But you gotta figure it out, right?
You gotta, and as I told you, like my one student who said that, it took 14 weeks to get her to say that. I would have hugged you also and said, yes, that's what you have to do. And hopefully we become smarter. We use logic, and we try not to make things horrible. That's the goal.
Try to move with a place of creativity.
Creativity is nice. I like creativity.
Also, what I'm guessing, creativity, love.
Love is good. Love I like
good.
love. That kind of good Christian love, agape love, where you just say, I'm going to care about this person just because they're a human being.
Yeah, and maybe contributing, like looking for different ways to, like adaptability, like that'll be good.
You saw how crazy the world was. There are these different scenarios, and you have to be on your toes to find what value you can find, given the nature that the future can be almost anything. And it can be, and there are a lot of glum scenarios out there. So that will require a lot of love. That will require a lot of empathy, and that will require a lot of adaptability. And if people collapse into the worst options, which is, I just wish the people who disagreed with me disappeared, that will make it very hard to be finding significance on this planet.
Which is happening right now, actually. If you think about it, like a lot of people, if you don't agree with them, you know.
Yeah, they just want to say you don't exist.
Yeah,
and I'm like going, I've
and
never.
it's important to just know that you guys don't agree, but come into, like, even though you guys don't agree, we're all equal in some
That
ways.
you have some dignity that maybe I'm not appreciating at this time or so, but it's there. And on the basis of my faith, I'm not going to be completely hateful and aggressive.
And I think that's gonna be very important moving on. Just being able to stand our ground, but also respect others and adapt and I wouldn't say fully adapt, because there's things that, but respect others and learn how to give back, but also grow in yourself, grow as a person, grow.
No, absolutely. I have friends. They're economists. They're smart people. They always think, they'll argue as if their position's absolutely true, and if anybody else disagrees with them, they're an idiot. And I always point out, I go, yes, maybe I'm the stupidest person on earth, but I have this opinion, and I feel that I have the right to advocate for myself, and I don't deny anybody else the right to advocate for themselves. They might be wrong, they might be mistaken, maybe I can help them figure out a better way forward or something along those lines. But I have to acknowledge that everybody has the right to advocate for themselves. And if I do that, I might recognize their self-promotion is weak, which means they're not going to win. But it doesn't mean that I have to think they have to shut up forever with a boot on their face, stomping on their face forever and ever and ever. I have to say they still have the dignity to advocate for themselves. Wasn't a good argument this time. Maybe next time they'll raise a point that's very significant and deserves consideration.
But I think that every point should be backed with information, not with a lot of emotion, you know?
Well, but emotion is a data point, isn't it? So that's one of the things that we start to, but I agree with you that we have to try to be rational and things like this. And so if I have a better perspective of things, and I see somebody's poorly advocating for themselves and their self-interest, maybe I have a moral duty to try to actually help them to frame their advocacy in a way that's reasonable, so we can actually give them something through the negotiation that they wouldn't otherwise have gotten, that was available for them that they didn't perceive was there.
I agree.
Because some people are just going, well, they didn't get anything, I crushed them, and that's it, and they're stupid. And instead of thinking, oh, wow, maybe they just didn't have this information, they didn't have this perspective, but we can do this. And so I can acknowledge them, instead of just looking for constantly to be winning. Because when you're constantly winning and crushing other people, well, God, you're leaving people bitter, angry, frustrated, and prone to violence.
Yeah, and that's gonna affect the society as a whole.
Yeah, so we need thoughtfulness.
Well, I literally learned a lot. We went 1 hour and 35. That's crazy.
Wow.
That was crazy. But thank you so much for being here, and thank you for just your presence and your knowledge. Do you want to say any last words?
Thank you. You're
No,
wonderful.
thank
You've got great skills.
Thank you. Well, thank you everyone for listening to this episode. I hope you enjoyed it and you learned a lot, because I definitely did, and it just gave me a different perspective and different things to think about. So, anyways, have a beautiful day, and we'll see you next week.